Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtadar Khan, your host. And as you can see, I have with me two very prominent intellectuals, one from Hong Kong and one from India. From India, we have Mithilesh. Mithilesh Mukherjee is a scholar of international relations. She's an independent scholar now doing research out of Benares. And we have Wing-Lok Hung, who is a professor in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And those of you who watch Conversations regularly have probably seen him on this show before, enlightening us with a Chinese perspective. And I also owe a great favor to Wing-Lok Hung, who escorted me through China all the way. And so he was with me, helping me navigate the difficulties of traveling through China, not just in the internet, but also in real life. So I'm delighted to have both of you on this show. So I'm going to start with Professor Wing-Lok Hung and basically ask him this simple question. How do you see this meeting? What is your initial assessment about what happened in Beijing?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Khan, for your invitation again. And I think one of the most important message that I received from this so-called historical meeting, particularly between the meeting of two great powers in the world, and that is the United States and also China both agree to create a kind of new version of building a new relationship. Well, that is so-called constructive China-US relationships of strategic stability. Because in the past, particularly last year, you can also see when Donald Trump first came to power once again, and that you can also see a very turbulent relationship between China and also the US as well. And then later on, not just talking about the reciprocal tariff, but later on, you can also see a lot of conflicts, troubles. And also Hong Kong also suffer from the growing tension, or even the world as well. So I think this meeting, at least very important message to me that we see. First of all, you can also see that is Donald Trump was, and also his delegation was warmly received by China. And that is very important signal, because if we are talking about, well, in the just last year, China and US was relatively problematic, and that would be quite impossible to imagine even this time, Donald Trump and also Xi Jinping shake hands with each other. And I think, because I also recently published an article talking about perhaps that would be also pay for very good foundation, to talk about how US or even China can get along with each other. And then ensure that, of course, I believe that we can't solve all the problems between US and also China just within one meeting. But at least both parties believe that they can create a kind of, that is so-called stability through communications. And that is, I believe, going to a relatively good direction to ensure that even to avoid, even major war in the future between two powers. So that is one of the very, very important message that I received. I believe, there will be even more, communications, or even talk about bilateral meetings between two leaders, or even talk about different levels, in order to see how to at least avoid major wars. And then later on, I believe there will still, conflicts, no matter in economic dimension, or even to talk about geopolitics, etc. But I think this is one of the very, very important message for me, and try to see whether to construct a kind of, positive stability, even though conflict still exists.
Are the two or three key areas of conflict that you see between China and US, besides the warning that Xi Jinping gave Donald Trump about Taiwan, right? About Taiwan's independence, saying that Taiwan's independence and cross-strait peace is not something that will happen at the same time. So besides the Taiwan issue, what else do you see as major points of conflict?
Well, that can be a lot. Yeah, because even before the meeting, I believe that, that is several issues. There are many issues actually. Both leaders, will be discussed, during the meeting as well. To China, I think Taiwan is the most important issue. Of course, we also talk about the trade, particularly talk about trade imbalance, between the U.S. and also China as well, and also maybe talk about the technological competitions as well as some other issue. Even talk about CK Hutchison, sales of all international ports as well. So, well, you can even name many, but I believe that is the major issue, at least to China. I believe that is, Taiwan and also trade issues are most important to China at this moment.
I want to now turn to Professor Mukherjee. Mithilesh, if you recall, we edited a book and we did a book together called, the book was basically published in 2024 by EIR, and our people are, I will be showing this when I edit this video. So the question that I really want to ask you is that you wrote an article in that about the Thucydides Trap, and it was very interesting to see that Xi Jinping in his remarks actually raised this issue that Thucydides Trap need not be something that is inevitable. And so I was wondering if you would recall from your arguments what the Thucydides Trap is, to explain to some of those who are not students of IR theory. And then give me your assessment on whether you think that there is a Thucydides Trap that US and China could fall into.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor for me to be part of this conversation. This is my first time, I guess, to be with you on this platform. Thank you so much, sir, for this opportunity. And as I'm very happy to share my views on this topic, as I have written this piece in 2022, which got published in 2024.
Yeah.
And the title of this paper was US-China Power Struggle or Peaceful Coexistence. Will it avoid the Thucydides Trap?
Yeah.
So I wrote this paper analyzing the international scenario at that time. And from 2022 till now, there has been a lot of changes in international arena.
Mm-hmm.
That time we were thinking like China is trying to push its position in international platform and trying to make its presence felt in the entire world, that it is also one of the, if not the biggest, but one of the biggest powers. So no one should take it for granted or lesser than any other power. So when I wrote this, I took this reference from Graham Allison's article, which he wrote in 2012, for Economic Times. In this landmark article, he writes that this article was based on 16 case studies, out of which only 4 conflicts in those case studies solved or resolved without any actual war. Out of 16, 14 went for war to resolve the situation or for the transfer of power from rising power to existing power, or existing power to rising power. So what he says in his studies, that when the threat of war exists, when tension intensifies between rising power and ruling power, will ultimately lead to a conflict. And this article he wrote in 2012 with reference to China and US relations. He, at that time, he could visualize this coming tension or conflict, that China is going to pose a threat to US existing hegemony in international relations. So what is Thucydides Trap? I think all the students who come from international relations, they know this man called Thucydides. He was a Greek historian who wrote a very classical, very famous book named History of the Peloponnesian War in 5th century BC, in which he writes that it was the rise of Athens. Rise of Athens, he considers Athens as the rising power, and that the fear that instilled in Sparta he considered as the existing power or ruling power that made war inevitable. So here, his theory suggests that Athens' ambitions, because it was a rising power, ambitions to get its due or say, or to uh, to push its power play towards Sparta, or to make its position uh, definite in terms of that it is also a power player. So what he said that this dynamics between rising power and existing power or ruling power made the war inevitable. So this is the theory basically which tells that if there are two power which are trying to fight with each other, the rising power tries to take away the position of the ruling or the existing power. So what is happening now is US has been maintaining its hegemony in international relations for a very long time. After, I think, Second World War, there was no question or the threat to its hegemony in international relations. Though during Cold War, it got some kind of threat from Russia, which was manageable by the US. There was two superpowers, but US maintained its position throughout since Second World War. Now China is rising, and after Xi Jinping took over, I think 2012 onwards, he started asserting its power, and domestically also, he, I think, sidelined the seven members intervention in decision making and took over entire decision making power in his hands. And after that, he made this very apparent that he will take China forward in terms of everything, whether it's economy, technology, military, etc., anything. And now he is very much concerned about how other nations or global player take China's position or think that China's position. So I don't think there is going to be an active war between China and the US. But whatever happens, whether they go in a friendly way, it is going to pose a threat to India, or if they are become hostile with each other, that is also going to give a kind of problem to India. So in any way, their closeness or their hostility is going to India going to pay for both in both the scenarios.
So Mithled, if you're familiar, if you go back even to the second term of George W. Bush, from that time onwards, the American policymakers have been focusing on saying that, oh, we are trying to nurture India as a partner to contain China, to balance the rising power of China. So that is something that the Americans have been talking about for a long time. And eventually it resulted in the emergence of the quadrilateral dialogue with Japan, Australia, and the United States and India. The argument was that these are four liberal democracies which are going to align against China's authoritarianism and prevent China from becoming a dominant player or establishing hegemony in Asia. And as a result of that assumption, the Americans really moved much closer, and we know about the so-called strategic partnership with India. But in the second term, Donald Trump has basically just not mentioned Quad or talked about even the word Indo-Pacific, which actually came from Trump's first administration, is not used much by the Trump administration. And it appears that the Quad has been completely downgraded from the US point of view. It's been more than a year and there has been no meeting of heads of states. The last meeting was in October 2024. When Prime Minister Modi and the Japanese as well as Australian prime ministers came here to India, to Delaware actually, to meet with Joe Biden in his house. So, are you worried that India will get marginalized if U.S.-China relations improve? Then America will feel that there is no need for either the Quad or the Indo-Pacific, and that might slow down U.S.-India relations, or are U.S.-India relations independent of U.S.-China relations?
Independent of US?
China relations.
India?
No,
Yeah.
U.S.-India relations are independent of U.S.-China relations. Is that how you see it, or do you see that if U.S.-China relations become better and better, then the U.S. will downgrade India and the Quad and everything else?
It's a very tricky question, and it's a very assumptuous question. We just can assume what can happen. No one knows what is going to happen in future. The thing is, India, this entire relationship with US and with China is in a transitional phase. Initially, we were too skeptical of China's intentions towards India. Now, with few happenings or few after a second term of Trump, this trade deal and tariff deal, what happened, India's attitude towards China has changed a bit. They are now more engaging in terms of trade, and they are now keeping their border issues, disputes aside, and trying to get on the terms on having a bilateral relations positively. That's what I think. And they are also understanding that being a neighbor, they need to have a peaceful coexistence, and it is in favor of both the nations. Along with that, it is very difficult to say that in which direction these relations are going to take place, because as far as US-China relations are concerned, if they come too closer to each other, they are going to. There may be a possibility that India's relations with China become little hostile, or again the skeptical, and America again thinks that they may not need India. But India is also not a very weak player in international relations. So sidelining or marginalizing India will be a bit difficult for both the players, I guess.
All right. Winglok, I want to come back to you and go back to this idea of the emergence G2. There was not much talk about G2 this time. If you remember, after Busan, Trump said, "Oh, this was a G2 summit," but even though this was a summit, there was not much talk about symmetry, as if the Chinese are coming together. But how do the Chinese feel with regards to the changing balance of power? Do the Chinese still worry about US becoming an impediment to China's growth and development? And is it also Chinese worry that America may continue to support Taiwan and also put pressure on China in ways in which China's growth and development, especially its international trade, will be affected? Or are the Chinese very positive about the way the meeting went? A lot of Americans are quite unhappy, actually. They feel that Donald Trump was very servile and very submissive to Xi Jinping. And they were quite surprised by how tough Xi Jinping was on not just the issue of Taiwan, but also on the issue of Iran. He said very clearly that we are not going to stop buying Iranian oil. And that was I mean, for Trump, that would have been a huge achievement if he could come back and say that, look, Iran is not only going to China is not going to give any weapons to Iran, but China is not going to buy any oil from Iran. And he doesn't have that. So from the Chinese point of view, is this meeting something in which the Chinese feel that they have sort of elevated China and continued with the decline of the US as Xi Jinping thinks?
Thank you very much for your very insightful sharing. As you said, I think this meeting was also very different from last time. Last year, that is Xi Jinping and also Donald Trump meeting in South Korea as well. Because this year we have seen geopolitics has changed a lot. Particularly, we have seen the war in Middle East. I think has significantly changed even the agenda of the meeting this time between Xi Jinping and also Donald Trump as well. Because what we have observed, from the crisis in the Middle East so far, that is, it also exposed, some weakness, of the United States nowadays, because, at least from the Chinese perspective, I also mentioned this in several interviews before as well. And the U.S., is also getting trouble, in the Middle East. And obviously, even though relatively speaking, China has been keeping a relatively low profile, but you also understand that is, China is taking a very unique role in mediation. And if we would like to talk about whether we can also, achieve a so-called relatively permanent and successful ceasefire, between, Israel, U.S. and also Iran, I think that should be with the support of China as well. And I believe even Donald Trump and his administration also understand this as well, even China. So this time, I think that would be very different from last time, because last time perhaps we still focus a lot on trade. But this time, if we would talk about even China can be even taking a greater role, in talking about particular the Middle East crisis as well. So that's why, you can also see maybe, some U.S. entities, they are not very happy with Donald Trump, but that is the fact that I believe, Trump also need to understand if he really would like to solve the crisis, the troubles in the Middle East. He also need to gain the support from China and Xi Jinping as well. So that's why, I believe, China has been taking a relatively advantage role, in the negotiation. I'm not sure, of course, what exactly Trump has said to Xi Jinping, but I believe that, Trump understands the reality. So that's why I believe that was really a historical meeting. Because even compared to Donald Trump's last visit to Beijing almost 10 years ago, I could see, that is the comprehensive capability of China has increased a lot, compared to 2017. So that's why I believe, Donald Trump, if he were in the meeting, trying to negotiating with Xi Jinping, I would also understand that he has been getting a more difficult task, So that is the reality, what we have seen. At least this is my observation as well.
Winglock, one thing that, see, the broad assumption behind this entire dialogue is that America is declining and China is rising. This is the big theme behind this entire analysis that everybody is doing. But I do want to ask this question, that there are lots of economic problems that China is facing domestically. One is the decline of domestic consumption. China is the only country which is facing deflation while everybody else is worried about inflation. And deflation means if prices of things goes down, it also has a negative impact on GDP. China's growth rates have dropped to 5% or below. So China is struggling to grow at 5% after growing for over 9% for nearly 20 years. And then there are these issues of demography, the population decline, unemployment among young people, and also these pressures that they are facing, not only from the US with de-risking, delinking, offshoring, friendshoring, all of this restructuring of supply chains, but also from Europe. The another major trading partner. So given all these challenges that China's economy is facing, how come, I mean, do the Chinese really feel that they're catching up with the US, or do they feel that, like some people say, that China may never escape the middle income trap? So, I mean, sitting there in Hong Kong, do you feel that there is enough steam in the Chinese economy that it can very quickly bridge the gap and catch up with the US maybe by 2040?
Well, sometimes you can't just look at a statistic. You have been to Shenzhen, also Beijing. Maybe you can also understand, just last year how the economic situation in China looked like, because, well, I also understand that because I also co-author another article on China economy with another very prominent economist in Hong Kong, Professor Horrocks as well. And you also talk about China has been facing economic headwind as well. Particular, talk about trade with the US or even to the world. But sometimes I think most economists, even my friends, sometimes we overlook that is talking about accumulation of wealth, particular from the older generation of Chinese people, in China nowadays. Because you also talk about that is, well, particular young people in mainland China, maybe in Hong Kong as well, or maybe in the US, has been facing difficulties. But that is also the truth because I also, every year, I also have many students, mainland students, coming from other cities in mainland China. To me, I think they are also even richer than me as well because they have been sponsored, their study, graduate study in Hong Kong. The cost in Hong Kong also quite high, but I think they have no worries, because they also back up by their family, their parents. And you talk about this is just thanks to the, market reform that is 20, 30 years ago. And that is something that I think most American families, well, didn't have, that is talk about accumulation of wealth. So even though some graduates, young people in Hong Kong or even particular that is in mainland China, maybe they don't have to get a very decent job, as you said, but they can still maintain a relatively good life just because they have been, financially supported by their parents, And that's true because of the one-child policy as well. Sometimes we also overlook, all different factors combined together. So, of course, we never know what our world will, even China will look like after 20 or even 30 years. But at least in the coming, I think, 5 to 10 years, even though maybe the world economy is not doing particularly well as well. But I believe that will go to the very disaster, particularly in China. And that will be very different situation compared to Europe and also to the US as well.
Mithilesh, if you remember, probably you were in college at the time, that in 2005, 8, etc., when people were writing about India and China, there was always this question, who would be the main challenger to the US hegemony? Will it be India or will it be China? And there were some people who were arguing that perhaps India would be, and then the gap between India and China suddenly increased so much that China's economy is now 4 times bigger than India's economy. And the gap between India and China is much, much bigger than the gap between China and the US. And lately, if you are aware that India went from being the 4th biggest economy to the 6th biggest economy. So we are living in an environment where all the major powers seem to be declining in that sense. If you look at China's growth rate, it's gone down from 7 to 5. Europe's, you need a microscope to find out what the growth rate of European countries are. They are like 0.1% and 0.5. No one is growing at 2% in Europe. And then India is also facing headwinds like the Prime Minister's request for people not to travel abroad, not to even stay at home, not to spend too much gas, not to buy gold, etc. So given this trend across the world, are you worried about how this war in West Asia is going to disrupt India's growth story that everyone is talking about? Is it going to disrupt India's development, or is India really prepared to handle the crisis? Unmute yourself, Mitli. Okay, I can do that. Yeah, go ahead. No, you're still muted. Oh, okay, go ahead. No, you're still. You need to unmute it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I very well remember those articles which we used to read when I was a student. I was doing my master's, and there was a chapter in our book that India is a rising power, and we have been reading not since then. I think in 2000s we have been reading these articles that India is going to be a developed, if not developed, rising power, rising power, rising power. I don't know when this rising is going to be a rising one. Um, Again, this could be the matter of perception from different scholars and intellectuals, because I attended one conference. It happened in BHU, and it happened in 2015. And that conference, there was one professor from JNU, and the professor was very much uh, convinced that India has already, because the topic was this, the rising India. So he was very much convinced that India is not rising, it has arrived to the global stage. So it again, for me, it is not. For him, it is. And for some who argue, they feel India is doing very good. In few aspects, it is, and in several aspects, from in my opinion, it is not. We need to do a lot in terms of uh, doing this rising thing to being arrived. And another thing which you have questioned is how do I see India's growth in coming days? As far as these, the kind of international scenario we have been living today, like it started with Russia-Ukraine war. Then I am not sure. I really don't get why international leaders who are supposed to lead, because they are supposedly global powers, and global powers are supposed to lead the world. They should show the uh, path. They should show where to go, how to go. And I don't know, I really don't get why they are engaging themselves in international conflict or military conflict. Conflicts which are military in nature are not beneficial to any of the parties. Parties which are involved, not only they get affected, parties who are not even involved in those military conflicts get affected too. And everyone pays a price. And that is really unfair. Since, see, I am looking those parties who are actively involved, but I am also feeling the burnt of those activities. And I don't see anyone is worried of those, like no one is talking about stopping those conflicts. I don't get what are they thinking. And if these military conflicts are going to be continued, then what India can do about the growth? We can't even talk about the growth. If we can sustain in this crucial circumstances, that is fair enough, or we will be feeling like okay, we are doing good. No one, I don't think in these conditions any nation can think of the growth, let alone India.
But still, India is projected to end up this year, even if there's some retardation because of the oil prices and also because the trade might be curtailed as a result of Hormuz. And because other economies are getting affected, they might import less from India. India might still end up with a 6% growth rate in that. But
yeah, that's what I was saying.
yeah,
If we could be able to sustain, if
so
we could be
I
able
like
to
to give the
sustain
example
these
of a one-day
circumstances,
cricket match, Mithilesh. Like if you're playing a one day and if 2047 is India's goal to become Viksit Bharat, India needs to grow at 8.5%. So the run rate has to be 8.5% per year. And if you keep growing at 6.5% per year, which means you're going by 2% less every year, which means, in cricket, if you don't get the 8.5 runs, then the next over, the run rate goes up, required run rate. And with every over that you don't hit your target, the required run rate goes up. The same thing is happening in the economy. On top of that, with all these military tensions that are going on in the region, I sense your lack of optimism, and I think you are right about that. So I want to come back. This is my last round of questions. I'll start with Mithilesh. Mithilesh, what are your expectations and hopes for this war in Iran, and what role can India play in trying to play? If you think there is any role that India can play to bring the war down, are you happy with the way the BRICS summit went in Delhi just this week?
India is trying or has been trying to play a very constructive role in stopping these military
campaigns. Yeah.
And India is actively involved in having a conversation, negotiations, and India has always pushed all the parties involved in these conflicts to put an end to these wars. And that's what India can do. And whatever is possible from India's side is, I think, India is trying it very hard to put an end to it.
Okay. Coming to you, Hang, what is your view? How is China? Is China too worried about that the Iran war will prolong? Are they worried that even though the amount of oil that China buys from Iran is not that much in terms of the overall percentage, is the Chinese government worried about this? Is it going to take more active role going forward? Because indirectly, Donald Trump has taken the ball from Pakistan and given it to China to be the mediator, right, in this meeting by asking China to put pressure on Iran and basically mediate on its behalf. Do you see anything significant from China coming through with this war?
Well, I think if you talk about the war in Iran, we even cannot ignore, the factor of Russia, because this is also very important as well. And that's why I believe, why Putin also visit, Beijing next week. I believe Xi Jinping and also Putin must talk about this issue, during their meeting. And afterwards, I think we will have a bigger and also clear picture about what you're going to settle about, the crisis in the Middle East as well. At this moment, I'm quite positive. I believe that there must be some constructive outcomes between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping as well. And now, we must also include, Russia in this discussion. So that's why even I estimate, that I think the problems, in the Middle East, at least, well, that will be still continue because you talk about that is a lot of possibility and also scenario as well. Particular who will control the Strait of Hormuz and also talk about, the compensation, the post-war, development, etc. But I believe, after Xi Jinping meeting with, Putin, maybe we will have more ideas about what is going on as well.
Well, I really want to thank both of you for coming on the show and sharing your views so candidly with us. I think we are living in very Well, that's how most people probably feel, that the times that they are living in are the most consequential times. But I think that we are experiencing some fundamental shifts in the global structure, global economy. I think things are going to look really bad overall by December. I think from a global economic perspective, growth rates are down. I was just checking the price of oil. It's continuing to go up. Since Donald Trump's return from China, it's now gone up to close to $110 per barrel. So, but we will continue to talk about these things. And so thank you very much for joining Conversations. From India, Mithilesh Mukherjee, and from Hong Kong, Wing-Lok Hung. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation again, Professor Khan. Always a pleasure, sharing with you as well.
You're welcome.